Hey everyone, I'm Alexis Garcia and welcome to PJTV. National School Choice Week is at the end of this month, and as choice programs continue to grow, we're seeing more and more research on how these programs are expanding opportunities and improving education for our children. But is anybody taking notice? Joining me now is Bill Evers, Research Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Bill, thanks so much for joining us today. You recently headed a task force looking at the biggest hits and misses in the media when it comes to education. Now, what did the media get right?
Well, they covered some of the major stories, such as the major political player, which is the teachers' unions, the major reform in education, which is charter schools, the biggest federal law, which is the No Child Left Behind law. Those were given decent coverage, for example.
Now, what were some of the important stories that you found that the media just completely ignored or overlooked?
I wouldn't say completely overlooked, but they did tend to ignore and neglect and not give the amount of coverage that's needed to a number of the stories. So one, for example, is the national standards called Common Core. This is going to change curriculum across the whole country. And it's going to affect what teachers teach, what teaching materials there are, how children are tested to see what they know, how teachers are evaluated. And yet, if you do an opinion survey of the public, about 80% of the public doesn't even know what this is or barely knows what it is.
Let's talk a little bit about the Common Core, because not only does there seem to not be really any public knowledge about it, but the administration seems to be sneaking it in sort of a backdoor way, tying it to these different funds. What should the public know about these national standards?
Well, the national standards, the Common Core standards, were written by some think tank people under sort of the umbrella of a lobbying group of the nation's governors and a lobbying group of the state superintendents. And so then the federal government, the Obama administration, used a competition for grants to induce many of the states, 45, 46, depending on how you want to count, of the states to adopt these academic curriculum content standards. So they list what each child is supposed to know in each grade for English and for mathematics. I would say the main thing to know about them is they're more demanding than what many states have, but in terms of international standards, the math are really quite mediocre, and the English do away with a lot of English literature and substitute informational texts like refrigerator repair manuals or newsletters of the Federal Reserve Bank for English literature. There's a big effect also on the governance of education, and that it's consolidated away from the states so that the federal government is becoming more and more the customer and not the parents and not the students.
Who wouldn't want to read about the Fed, right? But yeah, talk a little bit about that, because it does seem
it's
like—
pretty important, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it does seem like the federal government is trying to take away some of that local control from the public schools.
That is a major part of this. This is, we have under the system of the US Constitution, designed by Madison and the other people that participated in writing the Constitution, a competitive system. So the federal government does certain things, the state governments do certain things, and there's 50 of them, and there's all these thousands and thousands of school districts. So they're all competing with each other to be more responsive to the voters in their area and to try to do a job that fits with what those voters want. And so they provide different things. Now, people who want national consolidation, they find this lack of uniformity troubling, and so they want to impose national uniformity on that, and that's what the Obama administration has been fostering. There's other fascinating stories than this. Another one is all the progress that's been made in the state of Louisiana. It was really the leading reform state in the country. Now, in the last few weeks, including yesterday, there have been court decisions on these reform efforts in Louisiana. So some of the Louisiana effort is in the wake of the Hurricane Katrina, and so they completely upended the city of New Orleans schools and made them almost entirely charters, and that's proven beneficial, and there have been gains. Then the governor and the legislature put in a statewide opportunity scholarship or voucher program for Louisiana children, but the courts have declared that unconstitutional. It's still being appealed. They said the funding mechanism was not a valid one. And then yesterday, and that's Tuesday, another court, another judge said that most of the reforms having to do with teacher tenure and performance pay and teacher evaluation could stay, but certain other changes that the law made in Louisiana would have to go because they didn't follow a single subject rule. The act putting in these changes sort of only covered one subject, that is teacher performance and teacher quality, and it covered a few other things too. But this is the really leading reform effort, but the people around the country don't really know about it because it hasn't been reported nearly what's due. There are several other that we found. One of them is international comparison. So there's international tests. And these get reported, the results get reported, but the fact that these tests indicate, the United States has historically a sort of steady, mediocre performance in these results, but what's going on in other countries show that students could do better. On the other hand, there is a tendency to misinterpret these tests, and the media coverage is not in depth enough to prevent pundits from, sort of walking away with their pet conclusion from these tests. That really thorough and in-depth media coverage would lead us to, not buy these fads that get promoted in the name of these test results.
Yeah, we hear about some of these fads, but I'm glad you brought up Louisiana because Bobby Jindal has reformed that system. It's been an amazing transformation there.
Yes.
But why do you think the issue of school choice and some of these voucher programs? We saw even in D.C. this effort to dismantle this successful scholarship program. Why do you think there's like a hesitation to cover these things because there's just an opposition to this program, even though it benefits lower income kids and minority kids?
I think that there is the programs definitely help children from less educated families, particularly African American children. We have excellent studies from the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., and from Milwaukee that show this. The students stay in school. Their parents are very glad to have opportunity scholarships to go to alternative schools. And you're absolutely right. The Democrats in Congress and the Obama administration have several times tried to close down this proven effective program, proven by the highest quality of research. And Speaker John Boehner had to essentially walk up to the brink with the Obama administration at one of these debt ceiling crises and say, look, we're not going to approve a debt ceiling increase unless you allow the African American children of Washington, D.C. to have some choices and be able to get out of failing schools. I mean, this is a tragedy that we have to, because of the unions, essentially, the unions don't like this. They don't like a pluralistic system. They want a monolithic system with everyone sort of charted into it makes it easier to organize and for them to have power and influence. So unions don't like opportunity scholarships. They're the main opposition.
Yeah, and it's funny though, because you'll hear about, well, we can't take money away from the public schools because of the children, but as you pointed out, it doesn't really seem to be their top priority. But we have School Choice Week coming up.
So let me say something about the money. Remember, if a child takes an opportunity scholarship, the child is leaving the regular public schools, so the schools have fewer children to spend this money on. So that's a relief to the system, to the regular public schools, because they have fewer tasks to do. They don't have there's a child they don't have to educate anymore. On the other hand, the way a lot of these opportunity scholarships are designed, it doesn't, when the child leaves the school system, it doesn't put enough pressure on the public schools. Think of it as a company. If a company loses a customer or lots of customers, it starts thinking, well, how can I do better? The problem with a lot of these opportunity scholarship programs is that they make up the money instead of the money that normally would travel with the child, and you get so many dollars for so many children. They mask that, they buffer that, they relieve the schools from losing the money that would go with having fewer children. And so the schools don't feel the pressure. The school districts don't feel the pressure of no longer having the child. So in a sense, it's not as effective as it could be, the voucher effect.
Oh, that's a very interesting point. And, kind of looking forward to next year, what do you see, the emerging issue being in education? Is it this, the issue with teachers' unions and improving, this opportunity scholarship fund? Is it some other issue that we're going to see coming up here in 2013?
Well, I don't think it's primarily a federal issue, despite the Washington, D.C. being a federal issue. Most of the action is probably going to take place in the states. Now, if Governor Romney had been elected president, there might have been some federal action pertaining to taking federal programs and possibly turning some of that money into opportunity scholarship money that could be matched by states, or the federal money would supplement state money. But we're probably not going to see that. So action will just be sporadic where there are opportunities in different states. The same with other issues, related issues, collective bargaining being narrowed, teacher evaluations being stepped up, teacher evaluations having components of how the teachers' students do on tests, whether when there are layoffs, the layoffs are done according to seniority. All these things are going to be fought at state levels across the country. And it's hard to make a generalization, except that budget crises and so forth will be there. And the biggest budget crisis is one of our missed stories, and that is the teacher pension overhang. And so this is huge in many, many, many states. And they've had these rosy scenarios where they say, well, the monies that are supposed to be invested in these teacher pension funds are going to earn 8% return. Well, they're not earning 8% return. And so they're going to have a terrible fiscal cliff. And sometimes the states have not been setting aside the amount of money that even the law in that state might say they're supposed to be setting aside. So this is similar to the other fiscal cliffs that we have around the country, and you hear about cities going bankrupt. There's some amazing news coming to us in terms of the costs of teacher pensions that are hitting. The baby boomer teachers are retiring, and it's going to hit the fiscal system of this country really hard.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for your time today and for bringing some attention to these issues. I know we don't get enough education reform news, so thank you so much for your work. And you can actually read Bill's report, Top 5 Hits and Misses in Media Coverage of Education in 2012, by clicking on over to hoover.org. For PJTV, I'm Alexis Garcia. Thanks for watching, and have a happy and healthy new year.